kettle clicked off, and I didn't move. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my housecoat, the one with the faded blue stripes that my daughter keeps threatening to throw out every time she visits. Outside, the birch trees in the backyard were just beginning to turn. That first week of October when the leaves go gold almost overnight, the way they always do in Ontario. I'd made myself a cup of tea. I hadn't touched it. I was staring at my phone. I read the message again, then a third time, then I set the phone face down on the table and looked out the window for a long while. My son had sent it at 11:47 the night before. I'd only seen it that morning because I'd started turning my phone off at 9, doctor's advice, better sleep, and so I'd woken up to it the way you wake up to a letter slipped under your door in the night, already written, already sent, already decided. Hey Mom, so we've been talking and we think it might actually work better if the cottage trip is just us and Diane's family this time. Nothing personal. You know how it gets when there are too many people. Hope you understand. Nothing personal. I sat with those two words for a long time. The tea went cold. A chickadee landed on the feeder outside and left again. I thought about all the mornings I had gotten up before anyone else in that house. His house when he was small, and made breakfast before school, and packed lunches, and driven him to hockey at 5 in the morning in January, in the dark, in temperatures that would make your bones ache. Nothing personal. I want to tell you how this started, because it didn't start with that text message. It started, I think, the way most things do. Slowly, and then all at once. My name is Cecile. I'm 67 years old. I retired 3 years ago after 31 years as an occupational therapist with the Regional Health Unit in Sudbury. I raised 2 children more or less on my own. My son, who is now 41, and my daughter, who is 38 and lives in Calgary. My husband, Gordon, passed away 12 years ago from a heart attack that none of us saw coming. He was 58. He was shoveling the front walk on a Saturday morning in February, and then he wasn't. After Gordon died, I learned to be alone without being lonely. That is a skill people don't talk about enough. It takes years. It takes practice. You have to stop waiting for your life to be full again and start filling it yourself, deliberately, the way you'd plant a garden in soil that hasn't been turned in a long time. I filled mine with my work, my women's hiking group, my book club, my vegetable garden that takes over the whole back half of my yard every summer. And my children. Always my children. Even when they were grown and didn't particularly need me anymore. My son lives 2 hours south of me in a suburb of Toronto, one of those new neighborhoods where every house looks like the next one and there isn't a single mature tree on the street. He married Diane 6 years ago. Diane is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about her being a villain. But she is a woman who came from a family where everything revolves around her family, and when she married my son, he began to orbit that center too, slowly and then completely. I noticed it in small ways first. Holiday plans that used to include me began to fill up with her parents, her sister, her brother-in-law. My son started cancelling our Sunday calls, not often, but enough. When I visited, I felt like a guest in a house where I'd been told I was always welcome but wasn't entirely expected. Diane was polite, my son was distracted. I would drive home afterward and sit in my car in my own driveway for a few minutes before going inside. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I was adjusting my expectations the way you're supposed to, the way all those magazine articles tell you to. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I had a pension, I had my RSP, and after Gordon died, I'd also received the life insurance payout, not a fortune, but enough to sit in a high-interest savings account at the credit union for over a decade, growing quietly, the way water rises in a basement you're not watching. I had always planned to use it for something meaningful, a trip, maybe, something the whole family could share. Something that would outlast me in the form of a memory. When my son mentioned at Christmas 2 years ago that he'd always wanted to rent a cottage on Lake Huron for a full week, a real cottage, not a campground, something with a dock and a canoe and enough bedrooms for everyone. I felt something light up in my chest, that particular kind of happiness that comes from having a plan take shape. I started researching in January. I didn't say anything to my son right away. I wanted to do it properly. I spent 3 weekends going through rental listings on the cottage sites, comparing amenities, reading reviews, cross-referencing locations with driving distances from Toronto, from Sudbury, from Calgary, so my daughter could fly into Toronto and drive up with my son. I found one that made me stop scrolling entirely. It sat on a private point of land on the eastern shore of Lake Huron, near Kincardine, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a wraparound porch, a deep dock, fire pit on the water's edge. The listing said the sunsets faced west, directly over the lake. I pulled up the photos and looked at them for a long time. I thought about Gordon. He had grown up going to a camp on Georgian Bay, and he used to describe the way the light fell on the water in the evenings with a kind of reverence he didn't use for much else. I thought about my grandchildren. My son had 2, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6, running down to the dock in the morning in their pajamas. I thought about my daughter stretched out on the porch with a book. I thought about all of us sitting around the fire pit in the evening, the lake going dark, the stars coming out over the water. I booked it in February, a full week in August, peak season. I paid the deposit $800 on my visa and marked the dates on my kitchen calendar in red pen. I told my son I had a surprise for the family and that I'd tell him more in the spring. He'd said, "Mom, you didn't have to do anything." I'd said, "I know." Over the following weeks, I built a spreadsheet. I've always been organized. It's the occupational therapist in me, with columns for groceries, activities, driving routes, the nearest walk-in clinic, ferry times for the Manitoulin Island day trip I thought we could do midweek. I bought 2 new life jackets for the grandchildren in the right sizes and kept them in the closet in my spare bedroom. I ordered a waterproof deck of cards. I found a bait shop near the cottage that rented fishing gear by the day. I imagined my grandson crouched at the end of the dock, squinting at the water with total seriousness. I imagined my granddaughter collecting rocks along the shoreline and asking me the name of each one. I imagined Gordon in some sideways version of time, sitting in the Muskoka chair at the end of the dock with his coffee, watching the lake wake up. I told my daughter in April. She was immediately enthusiastic in the uncomplicated way she tends to be enthusiastic about things. Direct, warm, genuinely excited. She said she'd look at flights that evening. She asked if she should bring her paddleboard. I told my son at Easter, when he drove up with his family for the long weekend. He seemed touched. He really did. He pulled me into a hug and said it was too much, that I shouldn't have, that the kids were going to love it. Diane smiled and said it sounded wonderful. My grandchildren asked immediately if there would be fish in the lake. I went home that Sunday evening, feeling, I think, the best I'd felt in several years. The first sign came in June. My son called, one of the Sunday calls he had resumed after I mentioned, gently, that I missed them, and mentioned in a careful, sideways manner that I have come to recognize as the way he says things he is not sure about saying, that Diane's parents had expressed interest in joining the trip. I paused. I said, "The cottage has 4 bedrooms. We have your family, me, and your sister. That's already the 4 bedrooms." He said they could look at renting a second place nearby. I said that seemed complicated and that the whole point was being together. He said he understood, and the conversation moved on, and I thought it was settled. It was not settled. In July he called again. This time his voice had that particular flatness that I have learned means he is delivering a message that was not originally his idea. He said Diane's parents were really hoping to be part of the trip. He said they were flexible on the bedroom situation. They could sleep on pull-out couches. It wasn't a big deal. He said it would be good for the kids to have both sets of grandparents together. I said patiently that I had booked and paid for a specific cottage for a specific number of people. and that adding 2 more adults changed the dynamic of the trip I had been planning for months. He said he understood. He said, I understand the way people say it when they don't intend to change anything. What I didn't say, what I should have said, maybe, was that I had something else on my mind by then. I had begun to notice over the spring and early summer a shift in how Diane spoke to me during visits. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to specifically, but a kind of management. The way you manage someone you are not entirely sure about. She had started directing conversations away from me at dinners. She had started making plans for the grandchildren's visits that didn't include me until they were already made. Small things, the kind of things that, when you mention them to anyone, make you sound paranoid, and so you stop mentioning them. I told my hiking group about the cottage situation one Thursday morning. We were doing the trail at Kivy Park, the long route that takes 2.5 hours, and somewhere around the halfway mark, after I had laid out the whole thing, the booking, the Easter conversation, the June call, the July call, my friend Philippa said, Cecile, listen to what you're describing. Philippa is 72 and has been divorced twice and has, in her words, a finely tuned antenna for nonsense. I'm listening, I said. You planned it, you paid for it, and now they want to bring extra people and you're the one explaining yourself. I didn't say anything. Honey, she said, who is the host of this trip? The text arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October. By then the August trip was over. I'll get to that. But what the text was about was different. My son was asking very politely, very carefully, in the language he uses when he is hoping I will agree without pushing back, whether I might transfer the remaining balance I had already paid for the cottage. The full remaining amount. Nearly $3,000 beyond the deposit into Diane's family account, because they were planning a winter trip to Prince Edward Island, and it would help with the costs. He said Diane's mother had always wanted to see PEI in the snow. He said they'd love for me to be involved. He said it would mean a lot. I set my phone on the table and looked at the birch trees. Then I picked the phone up and scrolled back through the months, through the August messages, through the July calls, through everything. And then I looked at my banking app. I should tell you about August. The week at the cottage began well enough. My daughter arrived Thursday 2 days before everyone else, and those 2 days, just us, the lake, the porch, the particular ease of being with someone who has known you your whole adult life, were everything I had imagined the entire trip would be. We kayaked in the morning, we sat on the dock in the afternoon reading. In the evenings we made simple dinners and opened a bottle of wine and watched the sun go into the lake and didn't talk unless we wanted to. My son and his family arrived Saturday. The grandchildren ran straight for the dock. Diane was pleasant, organized, and in motion almost constantly, the way some people manage anxiety by managing their environment. I tried to give her space. I tried to stay out of the way without disappearing entirely. It was a balance I was not always sure I was getting right. Someday Diane's parents arrived. This had not been agreed upon. It had been, I would come to understand, quietly arranged around me. They were fine people. Genuinely fine. I had nothing against them. But they arrived with their own rhythms, their own expectations, their own gravitational pull on the week, and what I had planned as a gathering centered on my family became something else. Something I was attending rather than hosting. Meals I had planned were replaced. Activities I had organized were set aside. The fire pit evenings I had imagined became Diane's father holding court about his years working in Fort McMurray, while I sat at the edge of the circle and refilled my wine glass and wondered how I had gotten here. My daughter noticed. She caught my eye across the fire on Tuesday night and gave me a long, quiet look that said everything she wasn't going to say out loud in front of everyone. My son did not seem to notice, or he noticed and had decided not to. On the last evening I sat on the dock after everyone had gone to bed. The lake was still. A loon called somewhere to the north, that long, echoing sound that makes you feel how old and quiet and large the world is. I sat there for a long time. I had paid $3,800 for the week. I had planned for 6 months, and I had spent most of the trip feeling like a guest who had overstayed their welcome at their own party. On the drive home, I stopped at a Tim Hortons in Goderich and ordered a coffee and a butter tart and sat in the parking lot and made some decisions. So, October. The birch trees, the cold tea, the message about PEI. I read it once more. It would mean a lot. I thought about what it had meant to me in February to pay that deposit. The specific feeling of doing something generous, something lasting, something that would give my family a week they'd remember. I thought about the dock at 6 in the morning, alone. The lake holding the sky's colour. I thought about the loon. Then I opened my banking app. I navigated to the account where I keep my longer-term savings, the one Gordon's life insurance had originally gone into, the one that had grown slowly and quietly for over a decade. I had used a portion of it for the cottage. There was still a meaningful amount there. I set up an automatic transfer, effective immediately, from that account into a separate one I had opened at a different institution the previous September, after a conversation with my financial advisor about keeping certain funds more deliberately structured. My advisor, a practical woman named no one other than herself, which is to say someone I trusted, had suggested it months ago, and I had kept putting it off. I stopped putting it off. Then I picked up my phone and typed a message back to my son. I kept it short. I said, I've given this a lot of thought. I'm not able to transfer those funds. I've reallocated them. I hope the PEI trip goes well. I know Diane's mother will love it. Take care of yourself. I sent it before I could reword it into something softer. Then I called Philippa. She answered on the second ring. I said, Are you free this winter? I'm thinking February. I want to go to Portugal. There was a pause, and then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. I've been waiting, she said, for you to stop asking permission to live your own life. We went to Lisbon in February. Philippa and our friend Honora from the hiking group and a woman named Celeste who had retired from teaching the previous June and had been looking for a reason to go somewhere. I had never been to Europe. Gordon had always meant to take me. It was one of those things we kept putting off until there was more time, and then there wasn't. Lisbon is built on hills. That is the first thing you understand, physically in your legs, on the first morning. The streets are paved with small limestone tiles that have been worn smooth by centuries, and they catch the winter light in a way that makes everything look like it is lit from underneath. We walked everywhere. We got lost every day. We ate fresh fish at small restaurants where no one spoke much English, and we ordered by pointing, and it was fine. It was better than fine. One afternoon, near a viewpoint called the Miradoro de Grassa, I sat on a bench and looked out over the city toward the river. The Tagus, wide and brown and moving slowly toward the Atlantic, and I thought about Gordon. He would have loved this. He would have had opinions about the architecture and insisted on finding the oldest church in every neighborhood and gotten into long conversations with strangers at cafes. I thought about my son. We had spoken once since October, briefly, carefully, neither of us fully saying what we meant. These things take time to settle, I know that. I was not sitting on that bench without sadness. Love and disappointment are not mutually exclusive. You can miss someone and still know that you were right. I thought about the message I had received from my daughter 2 days before I left for Lisbon. She had called in the evening, Ontario time, early enough that I was still up. She said, "Mom, I'm really proud of you." I said, "For what?" She said, "For going." I sat on the bench in Lisbon for a long time. Honora came and sat beside me without saying anything. We watched the light change on the river until it was almost evening. On the flight home, somewhere over the North Atlantic at 35,000 feet, with the cabin dark and Philippa asleep in the seat beside me, I opened my journal. I'd kept one the whole trip, something I hadn't done since my 20s, and I wrote one line. I am not the person who waits at home anymore. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the dark water far below, and I felt for the first time in a long time entirely like myself. There's a moment somewhere over the Atlantic in the dark when you realize the world is very large and your grief is a very small thing inside it. Not unimportant, just small. Proportionate, finally, to what it actually is. I think about what it cost me to get to that moment. Not the airfare, not the cottage deposit, not the $3,800 I spent on a week that was taken from me quietly and without apology. I mean what it cost in the deeper sense, the years of making myself smaller so that others could feel comfortable, the Sunday calls I waited for, the Easter dinners I drove 2 hours to attend and drove 2 hours home from alone, the way I had learned, without realizing it, to ask permission for my own generosity, to offer things and then apologize for offering them. That is not kindness. I understand that now. What I had been practicing all those years was not kindness. It was a kind of fear dressed up as love. The fear of being too much. The fear of being left. And the cost of that fear, paid slowly over a long time, is that you end up sitting at the end of someone else's dock at someone else's party, at a cottage you paid for, listening to someone else's father tell stories, wondering how you got there. What Cecile, what I, had to learn is something no one teaches you directly. They teach you to be good to your family. They teach you that generosity is a virtue. What they don't teach you is that generosity is a dirtue. What they don't teach you is that generosity without self-respect is not generosity at all. It is an invitation for people to take more than you intended to give. And when the people taking happen to be the people you love most, it becomes very difficult to see clearly, because love has a way of explaining away the evidence. Philippa saw it. She had the clarity I had lost because she was standing outside the situation and I was standing inside it. That is one of the quiet gifts of a friendship that has lasted long enough to survive your own self-deception. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked me one question, who is the host of this trip, and let me arrive at the answer myself. That is what real wisdom looks like between people who respect each other. It doesn't announce itself, it just opens a door. And the decision I made to stop the transfer, to reallocate, to pick up the phone and call her before the feeling passed, that took something I hadn't used in a long time, not stubbornness. Something quieter and more durable than that, the kind of inner steadiness that doesn't require anyone's permission to act. I had it once, when I was younger, when I was building my career and raising 2 children on my own and navigating the first years without Gordon. Life had buried it under years of accommodation. I found it again at 67, in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Goodreach, eating a butter tart in the rain. We don't get to choose what teaches us. We only get to choose whether we learn. And the view from that bench in Lisbon, the river wide and slow, the light falling through the winter haze, and Nora sitting beside me without needing to say anything, that was the lesson made visible, not a reward. Just the natural consequence of finally deciding that my life was mine to live. I still love my son. That hasn't changed. Love, I have learned, is large enough to hold both disappointment and hope inside it at the same time. But love is not the same as self-erasure, and a woman who knows who she is, who acts from that knowledge, who refuses to be moved off the ground she has earned. That woman is worth something, to herself first, and in the end, to everyone around her. I am not the person who waits at home anymore.